Welcome, friends at Integral Body Institute. Today we have a very, very special guest for our live podcast, Sakino Mathilde Sternberg. The title of our podcast today is Healing Childhood Trauma. And Sakino is a clinical psychologist with over 40 years of experience in different fields of therapy and counseling, like systemic family therapist, Satir, 2 years training assistant at the University of Hamburg, Humaniversity Therapist, trainer at Osho Humaniversity in Holland. She's also a member of the Chamber of Psychotherapists in Berlin and German Association of Systemic Constellation. 4 years leading psychologist at Oberbergklinik Berlin, Brandenburg for psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and psychotherapy. So let me invite Sakino for our live today. Welcome, Sakino. Great to see you.
Thank you, Nisarga. Nice that you have me.
We know each other for many, many years. I met you in Pune. I assisted your family constellation group and primal group in Pune many, many years ago. I think 6 or 7 years, if not more.
More. 11.
11, yes. And I really always admired your work. That is a very kind of coming from that loving, conscious space of the heart. And so having so much experience, I'm very happy to have you with us today for the live.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
How about we start a little bit about your background, because 40 years of experience in the field, how this all started and how was your journey in this field of trauma healing, childhood healing, family constellation, if you can just share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, of course, my family story, my upbringing, my childhood story is certainly a big part, because I was brought up in a family of strictly Catholic in the countryside in Germany, and my father was heavily traumatized from the war. And he was very violent. He became an alcoholic, partly psychotic, and very, very violent and beating, unpredictable, and so on and so forth. And I think at the age of 16 or 17, I had an experience with a priest, a Catholic priest in a monastery, where from our school we were doing so-called Exerzitien, it's in German, so it's a kind of meditation retreat for a week. And this man was the first man in my life who listened to me and who I could talk to about things. And I remember that man was basically the reason why I decided to become a psychologist and to become a therapist, because I wanted to help people. That was my biggest wish. So that's the origin. And then I did the whole full study of psychology, and my professional career started with handicapped children. Mm-hmm. I was working as a therapist in an institution in Hamburg with autistic children mainly. And then for 4 years altogether, I think it was 4 or 5 years altogether. And then my mother died all in a sudden. She died of a brain aneurysm. And I fell sick with tuberculosis. Mm-hmm. And I was in a sanatorium, in a hospital at that time. We were isolated from others with tuberculosis. And during those 4 months that I was in this sanatorium isolated, I decided that I would have to do something about my life, because I was 31, 32 at that time, and I had lived a quite excessive life, working madly, having a very unhappy love relationship, and I was, at that time we didn't call it like that, but I think I was burned out. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to go into therapy, and I found a therapist by recommendation of a friend in Hamburg, and this therapist, he was recommended as being one of the best ones in Hamburg. So I went to him, and he turned out to be a sannyasin, to be an Osho disciple. And at that time, 1979, 80, I was everything but not spiritual. I was political, I was left-wing, engaged, but this therapist was I would say the first human in my life who really, really listened to me and who really helped me through a lot of my childhood wounds. So I did a lot of screaming therapy, and he was not only a psychoanalyst, he was also a gestalt and a body therapist. So we did a lot of screaming and working out, and then I also became a sannyasin, an Osho disciple, and that changed my life a lot, because I was, you know, when I'm doing something, I do it completely and totally. I'm never half-assed. So I went to live in the commune, and I did many trainings: primal therapy, encounter, bioenergetics, rebirthing, I think even hypnotherapy. And so that was a time where I was engaged in a lot of emotional release work. And then when 1985, the whole commune in Oregon, where I was partly living, broke down, also my world collapsed again. I think that was a very traumatic experience again. And I lived in Berlin at that time. I was sent, and then I met my husband in 1987, and I got married. And I continued doing emotional release work a lot. I got affiliated with the University in Holland, and I was, together with my husband, we were leading the trainings in Berlin, the University Therapist trainings. And at some point, around 1995, I realized that this work that I was doing, still I appreciate that work, but it was, for me, it was not fitting anymore. And then I met Bert Hellinger, and I found that this work, the constellation work, was really something that I wanted to do, that was resonating within me. And of course, doing family constellations, you come across all those intergenerational traumata all the time. But I still had excluded a big part of my family traumatic history, which was around the Holocaust and about the Nazi time. It was not talked about in our family. So I was not aware really what happened. And then in 2001, I was in a conference for constellation work, and I met this Israel professor, Dan Baron. And he had researched, I don't want to go too much into it, but he had researched about the effects of trauma in the next generation of Holocaust survivors. So he researched, and he found out that the children of Holocaust survivors had nightmares that related to their parents and ancestors' Holocaust experiences. And Dan Baron then asked himself if the children of the perpetrators would have also those traumatic symptoms. So he went to Germany and interviewed about 90 adult children of Holocaust, of Nazi perpetrators. And he was in this conference together with his Palestinian colleague, and they shared. And I got immediately attracted to that work that they did, which was storytelling. And to make a longer story short, I attended seminars and trainings with Dan Baron, and I realized that this silencing in my family was actually the same as in almost all other families in Germany, and also in families in Israel partly. And so I researched in the archives about my father's involvement, and I found out things, and that was just incredibly, yeah, it was really, really burdening. It was not easy to handle that. My father, by the way, he had committed suicide in 1985, 6 years after my mother died. And he had committed suicide by hanging himself. And nobody of us knew why he hadn't left anything. And we were always asking ourselves, why did he do that? Because in a Catholic family, you don't hang yourself. You don't commit suicide in any way. And when I did the researches, then I started understanding what this suicide was about. And then I think that was the time when I really started going into working with trauma, both with myself and with other people. And in the constellations and in my work with people, it just came up all the time and all the time. And I also studied with Peter Levine and Larry Heller about Larry Heller, especially about developmental trauma, because I felt that the way to work with especially childhood trauma is a different way than to work with shock trauma. So this is my way that I came to specialize in trauma work. So.
Oh. Well, thank you for sharing your story. It's really it's really touched me, and the way you also with vulnerability and honesty. Yes. And my question would be, and just to follow up, because you mentioned something about difference between developmental trauma and shock trauma.
Mm-hmm.
In Integral Body Institute, this is a series of lives where I invite different therapists, and we talk about holistic healing, about trauma, about pain, about body, mind, spirit, holistic healing modalities. And so I meet sometimes people who are telling me, I don't feel well, I feel something is not okay, but I was growing up in perfect environment, and do I still have a trauma? Or why I don't feel so well if I perceive my childhood to be perfectly, my parents there and my siblings and everything seems to be okay, and still there's something inside of myself that feels I'm not okay. And so my question would be, do we all have that early developmental trauma that you mentioned? And what is really your definition of trauma, of developmental trauma? Because that is also nice to bring that as a basic understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, developmental trauma is defined as something that, like a violation of our boundaries in an ongoing manner. So from very early child, can already happen in the womb, can already happen before birth. So in comparison to shock trauma can be a one single event, like an accident that we have, falling from a bicycle, or getting hit by a car, or falling from a ladder. Those are called shock traumata, and they are single events. Developmental trauma is an ongoing violation of our physical, mental, and emotional integrity. By, for instance, by neglect, that parents are somehow not capable of taking care of the children in an appropriate way, in a caring way, for whatever reason. And I'm not blaming the parents. It's very, I mean, let's say a mother is depressed for her own reasons. So she is not really available for her baby, for her child, to take care of the child. And that creates in the child, in the baby, an ongoing sensation of neglect. Or, as in my case, physical violence, an ongoing, on a daily basis, physical violence, like being beaten up, or sexual abuse, or being humiliated emotionally. Trauma is not only happening when you get physically hurt. It also happens when you get emotionally hurt. It can happen in school when other children are mobbing a child. So developmental trauma is defined that it's an ongoing process for a longer period of time in early childhood, which creates in the child and later in the adult a feeling of unworthiness. I'm not worth to be loved. I'm not worth to be taken care of. And this doesn't really happen on a cognitive level. It happens on a nervous system level. It's as if the nervous system gets continuously an information of shock. Right? Disruption, as Peter Levine defines it, the disruption of our connection to ourselves, our bodies, to others, to the environment. Like it's a break in the connection on an ongoing base. So that basically describes the difference between shock trauma and developmental trauma. And a shock trauma, let's say when a human being experiences a shock trauma later in life, and he has already been traumatized in his childhood, then that shock trauma builds on top of the developmental. Whereas if someone grows up, let's say, mainly okay, a shock trauma is not that deep and that damaging.
Yes, and I think also what I understand from that, it's beautiful what you just said. When somebody grows up in okay environment where they learn specific resources in their life, when they can rely on self-love, on peace, on other external or internal resources, then they have certain amount of resilience in the nervous system then to deal with the shock trauma that happens later on in life. Because they have that solid base from the child that is developing our psychosomatic nervous system. And so I think this is so important to differentiate those two different branches of trauma.
Yeah, because developmental trauma, like these very early childhood traumata, they are just forming our system. I'm not saying that a person that has severe developmental trauma cannot build resiliences. On the contrary, I can see it in my own example. I think I'm a very resilient person because I learned very early to rely on myself and to become strong and self-sufficient, which is on one hand a big resource I have. On the other hand, it also can make me very lonely at times. So it's a double effect. So people with early childhood traumata and developmental trauma, of course, they can also build resilience, but and they do, otherwise they wouldn't survive. if someone would grow up in a very protected and loving environment, of course they have a foundation of feeling worthy. I think that's a very main difference, that children who have been brought up violated all the time, they grow up with a feeling of, I always have to fight, I always have to prove myself, I always have to make a stand that I'm worthy. And this can create a very strong resilience, but it also, let's say, maybe they are not so capable of the, let's say, floating, easygoing kind of living. I don't know. I don't want to make generalizations here, but I think a child that has been growing up in a very loving environment, of course, definitely has some advantages in their lives, a stable ground to build on.
There's something I ponder upon lately. I go lately with learning from organic intelligence from Steve Hodgkinson.
Yeah.
The Peter Levine student that takes the work of somatic experiences into his own way. And the concept of negative reinforcement. So let's say somebody growing up in abusive, violent environment where family is dysfunctional, which is present for so many of us. And throughout these first 7-8 years, when we form our personality, that abusive environment is firing up adrenals and all the chemicals in our body. So this is something our system knows. This is something our system get used to. In adult life, we might create situation when we might unconsciously creating unhealthy patterns through to feed that negative reinforcement, because this is in a way what our nervous system knows. This is something our nervous system is familiar with, is comfortable with. But it doesn't mean in social engagement with environment we are dealing in a healthy way in relating with others or with ourselves. So my question to you, how do you see that concept and how do you deal it with your work? How do you build resiliency, that window of tolerance in nervous system for your clients who has that kind of pattern, so they can shift from negative reinforcement, notice it, be aware of it, and shifted to being more with the resource, more with social engagement, when the nervous system can rest and digest, like in parasympathetic standard rest and digest.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the key word in this is titration. So titration meaning that you have to go very, very slow in every step you do with those clients. And my way of working is very much in the here and now. So when I'm working with someone, also in group settings, I always work very slow steps, very slowly, like always checking back, how is this for you? How does your body respond now? What's happening in your body? What's happening in your emotions? Emotions not so often, but body. And what's happening between us right now? Because, as I said before, trauma is cutting connection from ourselves, from others, from our bodies. And healing trauma can only happen through connection. And when someone comes to me in therapy or in group work, I try to establish a connection between that person and myself. And I check back on that connection every couple of minutes. How is our connection right now? How do you feel in this moment with me or in the group? How is it for you to sit here, to be seen, to be exposed? So this would be my answer. That's how I work. In the moment, in the present moment, and very, very small steps, tiny little steps, which Peter Levine calls titrating. Does that make sense for you?
Yes, totally. Yeah. So just basically bringing experience into the body and sensing what's present and being with those sensations, with the feelings, with emotions, and being able just to witness it. And
yes, in the moment, in the connection with me, in the connection with their bodies, also in connection with my body, that I'm sensing in my body what I sense together with that, what happens with the person. I feel it in my body. And then also pendulating between, let's say, an unpleasant, a traumatic memory or experience in the body and resourcing. The concept of pendulation is very important there too, so that the person can learn to slowly, like in really, it's in mini portions, in mini steps, to go from an unpleasant to a more pleasant state, so that they tolerate also that they don't get overwhelmed by unpleasant states.
Makes sense. We have many viewers today on the live. I see Irene, she's saying hello. I see Dana. I see Oma, she's saying hello, Sakino. I see Hassani, Sharon, many other friends. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you want to ask any questions to Sakino while we are doing live, please feel free. Or if you want to share something about your story also, please do. My next question to you, Sakino, would be something personal from my life. Is that possible to heal trauma? Because I've been on the journey with healing my own story, my own trauma, related to basically my main theme is rejection. Being left by father in the age of 5, kind of creating all story around rejection. It's my fault. Why did he do it? Blah blah blah. And so I think it's a theme. And 22 years, and I must say that it were intense years in self-development for me. It's not like I was just doing weekend here and there, but I basically committed about 10 years living in India, Asia, just to work on myself in that area. And yet still I catch myself on like, in a loop that I'm questioning myself. Oh my God, like really? Is it does that ever finish? And then in universe is bringing me more experience for more intensity in this area somehow, and I'm just like trying to conceptualize it through spiritual ways. Oh, universe is bringing you to you so you can get a lesson, and then I am sometimes really feeling hopeless. And so what is the way? Is that ever a thing, or we just this is the way life goes? Like, what's your take on that?
Oh, well, my key word in this is patience. I believe that childhood trauma can be healed. I truly believe that. Because if I look at my life, it's one of the most horrible life stories you can imagine. And here I am, And I am happier today than I ever was in my life before, even though I am alone. I am not living with someone, but something inside of me has, I don't know how to call it. Something inside of me has settled or has accepted that my childhood cannot be changed anymore. The childhood was as it was. And all the later life events also were as they were. But I do have the capacity to, in every moment, to create an attitude to my life as it is right now, either of rejecting it and fighting against it, or accepting it as it is and see how I can put meaning to it. And in the last couple of years, I am teaching in Israel. And I was asking myself, and still sometimes do, why am I doing that? And of course, the obvious answer is I want to make amends for my father's involvement and what he did. I want to make amends what the Germans did to the Jews. This clearly. And that gives me meaning. It gives me meaning that I can share who I am with people and also teach from my life experience and my therapeutic background, teach what I am doing to my students so that they can continue also doing it. So for me, healing trauma means I find meaning in my life. And then the trauma and everything I have experienced is part of that creation. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Because it's not about making something undone. This cannot happen. Our life has been as it has been. And I always really look at Viktor Frankl, the great psychologist who survived several concentration camps. And he found meaning. And he is teaching about finding meaning. And so for me, finding meaning is helping healing trauma. And I always really support people in finding their way, finding what really pulls them. And it doesn't matter what it is. Maybe someone wants to be a nurse, or someone wants to be a teacher, or someone wants to be a gardener. If it makes meaning for them to do that, then that's healing their whatever they went through. I think finding meaning is one of the most important. And I'm not talking about the meaning of life in general, because I don't think that that's a thing to look at, but finding my personal meaning in my life. The thing that has meaning for me, that makes me feel that my life is valuable, that I have to contribute something. And in my teaching in family constellations, there are 3 principles, and the 3rd principle is balance. Balance meaning receiving and giving. And we have all, no matter what happened afterwards, we all have received life from our parents. Now, to balance that big gift, we also have to give something back to life. And as I said, again, for me, that was finding the meaning in what I'm doing. And that keeps me alive. That keeps me wanting to be healthy. That keeps me doing exercise, eating in a way that nourishes me, keeping friendships alive, all that kind of things. Because I know I want to pass on what I have learned through my life to the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think, I truly believe that that is healing, has healed, or is healing me, because the healing process never ends. You cannot say, okay, now I'm at a point in my life, I'm completely healed. Yeah, I don't think that that's the point, but to allow the healing process to continue, that's the healing.
Wow, this is a really powerful concept. I really like it. That the meaning of life, because I can really resonate in my life since some time where I'm fortunate enough to find my own purpose of life. I feel like I'm very passionate to what I'm doing. And so there's so many times that I find myself in freeze in life, that in the past times I would go into unhealthy habits of drinking, smoking, taking drugs, just to numb it. Why now? Because there's this meaning at the back of my head which says, pull yourself together. Pull myself together, and I know tools that can pull myself together in few hours, the longest, so I can go back to my center, I can go back to my essence. And this is so powerful, and I know many people actually have longing to find the meaning, and somehow, I don't know, like there's something in our society that doesn't teach people from early childhood to find the meaning. We are taught to follow certain scripts, learn by heart, education, and so there's not much learning on creativity of finding what's my gift, what's my meaning. So I think it's such a powerful concept that you mentioned, that I really resonate, that it really helps somehow to come out of unhealthy patterns and bring those traumatic patterns in alignment to just to step out of it consciously. Okay.
Yeah, and as I said, it's a continuous process. It's not ending. I'm in my last third of my life, and I feel there is so much ahead of me that I still have to follow. There is so much calling inside of me. Right now, I'm trying to write a book, and my second book, and so that I can pass on in also written form. So things like that, and the teaching develops every time I'm teaching. It's something new that develops, because I'm from my deepest understanding of my profession, being a therapist. It's an alive tool. It's I am the tool of what I'm doing. So I am all the time open to learn more, to open myself to more understanding of myself, a deeper understanding. Just recently, I have had an amazing breakthrough through a session I had with Irvin Yalom, for me, my hero of therapy. And well, in that session, I got a very big breakthrough of understanding a deeper layer of who I am. And that's really so amazing that this is what I think is to stay open for development, to not at a certain point say, okay, now it's enough. Now I've done everything. Now I go into retirement. I mean, retirement of myself. Like I've seen enough. I understand when people do that, because it can be too much. But for me, it's not an option. I want to evolve. I want to develop. I want to gain deeper understanding every day of myself. And about numbing, I have nothing against numbing, because sometimes I also do that. I go binge watching on Netflix for hours and hours. And that helps me to just come down and detach from whatever is too much at the moment. And then I come out of that again, and then I continue doing what I'm doing. But numbing sometimes can be helpful too. You just have to know the proportions. And yeah.
All right. Could you guide us into, at the end of this talk, could you guide us into a short meditation, something that we could take back home and practice on daily basis in a way to support us into, living in a more healthy life, emotionally, psychologically?
You still want me to answer questions? Because I see there are several questions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If there's any other questions you would like to answer,
well, there are quite some questions, as I see. I could. One question. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I try to incorporate it all, but if there's something that you would like to still talk about, please feel free.
Oh, there's a question. Is it possible to prevent a certain tendency in the family system by family constellation therapy, like, for example, addiction? Well, this is a good question because I think family constellation can help uncover unconscious tendencies that we might have to follow something from a former generation. Like taking on the suffering of someone in a former generation. So, and family constellation can help to uncover those things, those hidden dynamics, we call them. So that's possible. So family constellation, I always support. Well, there's another question that I also want to answer. There are more, but I don't think we have so much time. How do you feel about just surrendering to God's grace as a shortcut to these healing cycles, that as much as we do, it doesn't compare to God's grace? I think in the end of the day, we do have to surrender to God's grace. But that doesn't mean that we don't do our work. It's not either or, it's both. God's grace is always there. Whether you call it God's grace or the grace of existence, or that's always there. But it's like someone coming to God and complaining that his camel ran away. And God says, did you tie the camel to the fence? So we have to do our work, and then God's grace will be there.
Beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, it's not from me. I read the story some and I really liked it. Or the same, there is another story about the man coming to God and complaining that he never wins the lottery and why God is not helping him. And then God says to him, for God's sake, buy a ticket.
That would be helpful, yes. Please guide us into some short meditation so we can just get grounded and connected.
Yeah, I always do something at the beginning of my workshops and also in between. And I invite you to just take a good seat, like really allow yourself to sit where you are sitting and putting your feet on the ground and allowing your feet to be held by the ground, because the ground, the earth, is the basis. And allowing the gravity of the earth to support you. And also allowing yourself to be held by the chair that you are sitting on. And then connecting with your breathing and feeling how you're breathing in and out. And allowing yourself to notice that your breath is always flowing in and out your body by itself. And then noticing any sensations in your body. In any part of your body, without wanting to change it, without judging it, just noticing. Maybe tension, maybe some pain, maybe temperature on your skin. And then I invite you to listen to any sounds that you might hear in your environment. Orienting yourselves through the sounds that you are hearing. And then opening your eyes and just turn your head to your left and see what you are seeing. Any colors, any shapes, any sizes, any objects. And slowly turning your head over to the other side, noticing anything that you're seeing, and orienting yourself. Then taking a deep breath deep inside your body. And breathing out.
Beautiful.
And then you can do another breath and stretch your arms and legs so your body really, all the fascia are moving, like really stretching yourself for a moment. And if you have closed, I mean, you should have opened your eyes already. So just allowing yourselves to be fully present in this moment, wherever you are.
Oh, beautiful practice for orientation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I like
it, but I feel more connected to myself, and beautiful. So I feel something that really resonated, just to complete our talk, was this God's grace, that we all have God's grace, and God is always gracefully showering us with his or her presence and love, but we still need to do our work, what you said, tidying the camel into the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
or buying lottery, and so thank you very much, Sakino. Those of you who'd like to find Sakino, you can find her website, sakino.de. I know Sakino is also on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can reach her out. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's live. The live will be also posted on YouTube, Integral Body Institute YouTube. And I am very, very grateful to you, Sakino, for your time, for the amazing work you're doing. Keep on spreading love and constantly learning. I see I see you as we started for 11 years, and I see your development growth, and it's very inspiring for me to see a therapist who is constantly moving forward. Very, very beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nisarga. It was really a pleasure. Totally beautiful. And I think you are doing great work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.